Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Hello, everybody. So, I will be doing a fair amount of soldering here coming up, specifically on my Millennium Falcon. Not a fair amount. I'll be doing some soldering. And I had some other work that I needed to do some soldering. So I thought that I would just do a video to kind of maybe demonstrate some of the basics of soldering. I know there's probably a fair amount of people out there that's never soldered before. Maybe they're intimidated by it, those types of things. So I thought I would kind of go through some of the basics. I've done a lot of soldering in my day, particularly in the Army. So what we have here is we have a cable, and it had a bad solder joint. The wire came off. It was supposed to be soldered to that pin there, and it's no longer soldered. So right now my soldering iron is heating up, and what we're going to do is we're going to fix that. So the first thing, the most important thing with soldering is making sure that we're dealing with clean things that we're soldering. So um, odds are when this was soldered, it wasn't cleaned properly. Maybe they didn't use a flux to get a good solder joint, but it wasn't a good solder joint at the time, and so that's why it came loose. So um, what we're going to do is we're just going to hold that there for a second. We're just going to make sure that we get it clean. So we're going to clean off as much of the old solder as we can. And soldering iron is starting to get hot. You can see that it's melting the flux there. This is just a paste flux. So one of the things that I always like to do, I have a sponge that's a little damp. This gives me the ability to wipe off my soldering iron. So you can see soldering tip's nice and shiny now. That tells me that it's clean. It's always important. And there's a couple different ways that you can clean solder off of a joint. One of them, this is called a solder wick. So basically all it is a very finely little woven copper thing, and very finely threaded. And so when you get solder on it, it will actually wick away that solder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a bit on it, and that will help that solder kind of flow into it. And then what we'll do is I'm just going to see if we can get this done in as smoothly as possible. Unfortunately, I don't have a good, you can see when the smoke popped up, we can see that we got a little bit of the solder there on the end of our soldering wick. So it pulled some of the solder off of our wire, which is what we wanted, and we will re-tin that and kind of clean it up a little bit. The more important part, like I said, unfortunately, my power cord for my soldering iron does not have a very good angle. So we're gonna get a little bit more flux on here. We're gonna see if we can't. Well, first of all, I'm gonna need better glasses. These things are small, and my eyes are not as good as they used to be. So we're gonna see if we can't get this pin cleaned up a little bit. Come on. All right, so that cleaned up this a little bit. You can see still some of the flux there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that it's what they call tinning. So what you do is you just make sure there's a little bit of solder there, and there's a little bit there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tin our wire. So let's have a look. So you can see that pin is the one that I cleaned up. And we're going to clean up this wire a little bit. Make sure that it's good to go. So when we're soldering, we want to make sure that we get nice, quick heat transfer. Because the longer that it takes, the can really mess up our wire. And see, this wire, it's not the most flexible wire in the first place, but we can tell that there's a lot of solder that came up inside here because when I try to bend it, it should flex pretty well here. So usually when you want to tin your wires, you just want to tin the tip, just the tip, and then the rest of it should be bare. But this has got solder clear down probably 1/8 of an inch or so. Basically, the amount of wire that's sticking out, there's at least that much solder inside the insulation, which is not desirable. But we could cut it back. However, that could cause maybe some fitment issues with the wire and all that kind of stuff. So we're not gonna really deal with that too much. Sometimes it's just a matter of making sure that everything's kind of situated. So I always just put a little bit of solder on the tip of my iron, and then when I touch it, it's going to transfer that very quickly to the wire. Now that we have that transferred, we can find the pin, which is right here. I may have to go get my glad hands just to hold all this together. Let me do that because otherwise it just makes for a big mess. Holding it stable will definitely be helpful. Okay, so I've got my glad hands. Hopefully we can at least hold part of this. They don't quite come together as well as I would like, but maybe with any luck, we can kind of hold this in one spot. There we go. At least hold that. And then let's get our wire situated where we want it. And then maybe we can do this. Bring in the old forceps and hold our wire right where we want it as well. And again, we just have a little bit of solder on the end of our soldering iron. See if you can see that. So just a little bit of solder. Matter of fact, what I'm going to do is kind of wipe it off, and we'll put just another touch of solder so that way I've got a nice clean, fresh. I only want just a little. Just the only thing I want the solder for, because of the fact that everything else is tin, the only thing I want the solder for is it helps with the heat transfer. So that way, basically that molten solder Really helps that heat transfer go quickly, and we shouldn't, with this being tinned and everything, we shouldn't really need to take any more solder to the party. And the other part is you have to make sure you hold it nice and steady. Let's have a look here. Yeah, see, a lot of heat transferred in. It melted the insulation a little bit. But the question is, do I have a good solder joint? And if we look around, you see just here, what you're looking for is you want to be able to see kind of part of the pin along with the strands of the wire, all of that kind of stuff. You don't want to see just globs of solder, and that looks pretty good. So other than the fact that there's a lot of heat transfer through the air, but the fact that there was too much solder on in the first place, there wasn't a lot that we could do about it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put this back together, um, and I'll be able to take it to work and use it. And then I've got um, one other thing to solder here, and give us another little chance to demonstrate the same process. Now you can buy soldering irons pretty cheap. I think if I remember right, I saw one at like Walmart for 30 bucks or something. Like you can buy a simple little soldering iron. If you're just going to be doing a little bit of solder, you can buy simple little soldering irons at Walmart, stuff like that. One of the things that you'll want to do, a lot of people, this is rosin core solder. Um, and I mean, there's better solder than this, but I kind of had this inherited. But you can see it says rosin core solder. So there's you can get for like real fine soldering, you'd want to have some finer solder, like thinner solder than that. But this will work. You A lot of people claim that all you need is rosin core solder. You shouldn't need flux. Uh, my opinion is, when in doubt, use flux. Flux flux helps you clean your surfaces, so it'll help make sure that you have a clean surface. And so I always use flux, just to make sure that I have a clean surface. So uh, we're just going to. So I have this. This is for a DC input for like a um, car thing. So the big question is, am I going to be able to transfer the heat to this well enough? So this isn't the biggest soldering iron, and yeah, so the end's getting hot. You want the soldering iron to be big enough that it transfers the heat like quickly. So something like this, what I would be worried about is melting this plastic around it before the solder actually melts. But we are getting solder meltage, so that's important. Um, and so see what we're going on to here. Let me get the other end of my wire. So this one's kind of the same boat. It just kind of pulled out. And the way this works, one side's the negative, that's this side. And see, right from the manufacturer, you see how cloudy that is? You would expect to see that to be nice and shiny. So even at the manufacturer, they didn't do a very good job. But we just want to make sure that we can get it kind of cleaned up and resoldered. As soon as I melted the solder, look how it just splays out. We're going to fix that. There we go. We'll kind of twist it up a little bit, help it kind of stay together. I'm going to dip it in flux so you can see. I don't know if you can tell, but we have flux in here on the wire directly. So when I'm tinning a wire, what I usually do is I'm going to get a decent amount of solder on my soldering iron and just clean this soldering iron off. So we get a decent amount of solder on the soldering iron like that. So you can see I've kind of got a puddle of solder there, and then it should just be a quick touch and it just transfers right to it. So you can see how that solder is on there. It's nice and shiny. It's not a big glob of solder. So we got a good tin job here. We're just going to put a little bit on the bottom. Make sure we get solder all the way through. A little bit too much solder. And if you're using a sponge with water on it to help wipe off your soldering iron, one of the things you want to be careful of is don't have too much water because it'll cool off the soldering iron too quickly and then it doesn't really clean that well. So there we go. Okay. So there's that. Now we know that we have heat solder in there. We may see if we can't put just a little bit more in there. See if we can't hold this with our hands again. Let's do this. All right. I don't know if there's a good way for us to hold this. I don't think so. Not really a good way to hold that with the glad hands. We're just going to have to do this the hard way. So what I would like to do is get this hot and then feed a little bit of solder into it. There we go. Well, that could use some flux too. That's its big problem. It doesn't have any flux, so we need a good way to get some flux in there. Use the end of my tweezers here. And it's still carrying enough heat that it melts the flux. The flux melts very quickly, very easily, and it's still carrying enough heat that flux just melted. We may have enough solder. We don't have to do that. There we go. And you see how with that flux, because it was so clean, it went exactly where it was. It didn't puddle up or anything crazy like that. So that's what we want to see. All right, so now my little stand is pretty warm. I kind of touched it and grabbed my attention. Back when I was in the Army, I had a nice little soldering station and all that kind of stuff. I don't have that here at home. I just have this cheaper rig, but we can make it work. So, that's hot too. Yay, Merry Christmas. Okay. So, let's see if we can figure out how to do this easily. So what I want to do is get this nice and hot, and I'm just going to push that wire in there. I mean, it's already fairly warm, but not really the best wire for this job. But it's the wire they used, so normally I would not be terribly satisfied with that, but I have to work with what I have. So you can kind of see, you can easily see where it's at. It's a little bit shiny, but yet a little bit kind of milky. It's going to be good enough for what I need it to do. It's good and solid. If I wiggle it around, it's not coming loose. So I would say that I fixed it, which is always a good thing. So we can put this back together. This goes like that. This will just push inside of here. And just like that, I can plug this back in. And I'll be able to use this. So this is actually for a heater to use in your cigarette lighter as a supplemental heater in your vehicle. So I had a bit of a problem with heat this last winter. I've since gotten that fixed, but so that's the basics of soldering. Coming up, I have these LEDs, and I have an Arduino that we'll have to be doing some soldering on. Some wire, all that kind of stuff. So coming up, we'll be working on that, and that will be for the engine lights on the Falcon. But we got to get the mandibles taken care of first. I had some time. I needed to get that cable from work fixed, and I thought I'd do a little video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully I was able to teach you a little bit something about soldering, and maybe take away some of the mystique and the scariness about it. Take that away from you. And by all means, don't be afraid of it. All you have to worst thing you can do is touch a hot soldering iron. So there you go. Thanks everybody for watching, and take care.
All right, hey. All right, good job, guys. Let's just not come in tomorrow. Let's just take a day.